In 2011, during just one afternoon, Anders Breivik embarked on a murderous rampage that would send shockwaves around the globe.
We all had this sensation that an act of war was really taking place.
As the clock ticked, the body count rose.
We had no idea if there was 15 people shooting, one person shooting.
Death toll was just rising all the time.
Now I was convinced I was dead.
And with it the question, why had Breivik waged a 3.5-hour war on his own innocent countrymen?
It's like trying to understand Ted Bundy or Adolf Hitler.
And committed history's deadliest killing spree.
Who did this? Who is behind this? Where did the hatred come from?
The 22nd of July 2011, Norway. A Scandinavian country admired for its landscape, high living standards, and for having one of the lowest murder rates in the world. In the capital city of Oslo, the day had begun like any other.
22nd of July is in the middle of the main holiday in Norway. And of course, the weather was pretty bad, as it always is. But it's still summer, so most of the people were actually at holiday. Pretty normal summer's day in Norway, actually.
We were in the office, and it was quite a busy Friday. We were all looking forward to the weekend.
At 3:18 p.m, a white van is captured on CCTV, parking next to Norway's government headquarters. Its driver is 32-year-old Anders Breivik, and cameras record him leaving the scene, armed and dressed in police-style uniform. Minutes later, at 3:26 p.m, the country would be changed forever as the world's worst killing spree began.
Og det var meldt om masse regn, og hørte jo da et voldsomt drønn. Jeg begynte å lure på om det kunne være tordenvær som hadde satt inn, men det var det ikke. Jeg hørte det var en veldig spesiell snert, et tungt drønn.
Joachim Ringstad, a local shop owner, would feel the ferocity of the explosion firsthand.
I remember just being in the office, and suddenly there was just like a pressure wave, big pressure wave that just kind of felt like it just blew through the whole building. There was debris and dust everywhere in the air. I thought the building would come down as well.
Local businessman Johan Tandberg would be one of the first on the scene to witness the unfolding fallout.
When the bomb exploded, I was underneath this building here in my car, driving. Actually, I was on my way home. I had to lay down on the floor in my car. I thought the ceiling was coming down. I was scared. It was a big air pressure through the tunnel. My car stopped, actually. I started again, and I drove out from the tunnel.
Immediately when I got out from the tunnel, I saw this disaster that had occurred outside. I started to film maybe 8 seconds after the blast or the bomb went off.
The massive deadly blast, killing 8, transformed Oslo from tranquil to terrifying.
I thought it was a truck that had ran into the building, or an earthquake. Everybody around me just froze, like they didn't know what to do. And I just ran out to see what was going on. And then when I got to the door, the second I got out, I saw glass falling down from the sky, so I couldn't run out.
I saw people on the street. People were laying on the street. It was very quiet, I can remember. It was totally silent. Only thing I can hear was the alarm inside the buildings, the fire alarms.
With authorities beginning to arrive, the scale of the task facing them quickly became apparent.
Jeg kom inn I området bare noen minutter etter eksplosjonen. Da var det fortsatt masse røyk I området, støv fra eksplosjonen. Det var røyk fra flammer. Det var store ødeleggelser på stedet. Det var døde, hardt skadde.
Trekk unna! Trekk unna! The blast, you could hear it all over Oslo. Up to 70-80 kilometers away from this spot, people could hear the bomb went off.
We could feel it even where I was living. So I went outside and I looked toward the center of the town, and there was smoke coming up where government buildings are.
First thing I thought was Norway was under attack.
Kom dere lengst mulig unna alle sammen, flere kvartaler. Her kan dere hase mer, og det kan sprenge mer. Det flere oppover?
One building I went into, helped some people out. One building was so damaged, so I couldn't go into it. I was afraid it would fall down.
Er det folk her?
It was vacation, it was summer, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Most of the people were not at work, thank God. So most of the offices were empty. The doors, the walls, everything was smashed in, so you couldn't see that it has been an office. People were really scared in town for more bombs or for who did it.
The white van parked outside the government buildings had been packed with almost a ton of fertilizer-based explosives. Its detonation had left 8 dead and more than 80 injured.
We all had this sensation of that an act of war was really taking place, and we were wondering, who did this? Who is behind this? Where did the hatred come from?
At 3:26 p.m., the 22nd of July 2011, Norway's capital city of Oslo had been devastated by a massive car bomb. It was a day that Anders Breivik had been preparing for months, and the bombing was merely the beginning of his killing spree. The 13th of February 1979, Oslo. Anders Breivik is born to a diplomat and a nurse. His childhood was marked by the divorce of his parents and worrying behavior that would draw the attention of the authorities at a very young age.
He was under observation by a child psychiatrist when he was at the age of 3 or 4 years old. And they all gave him a quite serious diagnosis that he was already a different psychiatric setup than normal kids.
At the age of 4, Breivik was assessed by psychologists because they became quite concerned about the home life his mother was bringing him up in. They thought that he'd been sexualized in some way and that his mother was projecting her own ideas onto him that weren't appropriate for a 4-year-old boy.
The family unit would quickly begin to dissolve, leaving Anders in the care of his increasingly unstable mother and isolated from his father.
I think Breivik's father is present mostly in the form of his absence. You know, he was not there for Breivik.
He certainly didn't have much of a family to live with. I would say he was of a neurotic background. He was an individual who was prone to outbursts or dramatic scenes and shows of largesse.
As the dust began to settle in Oslo's city centre, the investigation had begun into who could be behind the atrocity.
Vi fikk inn mange meldinger om bombelignende gjenstander. Det kom inn mange meldinger om om eksplosjoner, og det kom mange meldinger om mistenkelige personer som måtte sjekkes ut.
I actually thought about 9/11, something like that, because it was like a disaster area, because people were just walking around slowly, like they were like zombies in a sense.
Så var det et voldsomt og uvirkelig bilde. Det er ikke sånn man forventer å se i Oslo, ikke i Norge, og kanskje heller ikke i Skandinavia.
Oslo and Norway was completely unprepared for something like this, and pretty much taken with their pants down.
One of the interesting things about Breivik's spree, of course, is that he bought himself extra time. For a while, the police are only taking calls about the bombing and nothing else.
Det var lite informasjon å få i en tidlig fase. I etterhånd så vet vi at det har ringt inn personer som har meldt om forskjellige bevegelser.
Pictures coming through to the police control room would offer the first crucial clues in their hunt for the perpetrator.
Vi kunne få fortalt hvor gjerningsmannen hadde gått, hvilken bil som var parkert på utsida, som da var blitt sprengt, og registreringsnummeret på den, slik at alt av det ble sendt inn til de som holdt på med etterforskning her inne på politihuset.
But the culprit was already one step ahead of the authorities, and what he had planned next would dwarf the carnage in the city and shock the entire world.
Breivik was driving out of town when his bomb exploded.
I think he enjoyed the deception. He was absolutely relishing the artistry of what he was doing.
He was driving for about 40 minutes until he came to the nearby lake of Tyrifjorden.
With confusion and tensions mounting across the country, Breivik would begin to execute the second stage of his plan. The island of Utoya was hosting a summer camp of young Labour Party activists, and Breivik was headed straight for them.
And he parked his car on the ferry crossings over to Utoya, and he presented himself as security police officers there to instruct them about security measures that needed to be taken in light of the explosion that had just happened in Oslo. And they sent the ferry over to collect him.
What would come next would be an act so sinister it would strip a generation of its innocence. Located 50 minutes outside of Oslo, the picturesque island of Utoya is famed for its outstanding natural beauty.
Utoya is actually like whole Norway just placed within a couple of 1,000 square feet.
Playing host to the annual summer camp for the youth division of the Labour Party, Utoya seemed a perfectly formed paradise.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
From air, it looks like a heart just dropped into the ocean.
Every year we've been using the island for a big summer camp where we gather maybe 700 youth one week in July.
I cannot explain it in any other word than a perfect summer camp.
But this island idyll would soon be transformed into a nightmarish vision of violence by Anders Breivik.
People were playing football, volleyball, everything was just normal, perfect. Suddenly, the one who was running the island, we called her Mother Utoya, comes in with a look on her face that I've never seen before on anyone, and she said, something has exploded in Oslo.
Of course we were shocked, and we saw pictures, and it was like seeing scenes from a city in the war.
It was like someone switched the light off. and took the breath out of everybody's lungs. It was no joy anymore. I remember walking up here and my mother called me. She was worried something happened to me, and I said, no, nothing happened. I'm on Utoya. I wasn't in Oslo, and she should be just calm because I'm probably at the safest place in Norway right now.
No one could have imagined that the man behind the bombing in Oslo had his sights set on the island of Utoya. Anders Breivik's position as an outsider had been defined at an early age.
Breivik grew up in a very affluent part of town, but he had a single mother and an address which was not kind of on par with his classmates. And I think he felt rejected.
Aged just 14, he had sought acceptance by joining a nationalist gang, but his natural demeanour set him apart from the other gang members.
As I remember meeting this guy, it's probably on a party. I can kind of see him just sitting there, watching, trying to figure out how to blend in.
However, there was one aspect of youth culture that Breivik did excel at, one which demonstrated his ability to prepare and execute a plan in extreme detail.
He would also try to establish, a reputation as a graffiti artist. So he was apparently, according to the people who knew him at the time, planning his graffiti raids like a general. Extremely good with the logistics, getting the number of cans and planning his missions.
He was definitely searching to get some recognition, to be someone.
As it happened all the time with him, he worked very hard for recognition, but he ended up being rejected also by these people.
Breivik has certainly made reference to being isolated when he was younger and in his teens, but he's also showed adept skills at belonging when he needed to. So although he postures himself as being the outsider's outsider, as a narcissist he's also very capable of working on the inside when he needs to.
Such capabilities would prove crucial in carrying out the second stage of a killing spree that has already seen 8 dead.
Noe senere så fikk vi melding om at gjerningsmannen kunne ha en politiuniform på seg, at han kunne ha en skuddsikker hjelm, og at han hadde våpen I hånd.
At 5:17 p.m. on the 22nd of July 2011, the ferry arrived at the island of Utoya. Disguised as a police officer and claiming an obligation to keep Utoya's inhabitants safe from harm, Breivik was welcomed.
They sent the ferry over to collect him, and they carried his big suitcase with his ammunition.
At 5:21, the first shots were fired, beginning what would be over an hour of unimaginable horror.
The first thing he did was to go and ask for the guardsmen of the island to come with him, and the woman who was the head of the camp, and then he drew his pistol and he shot them both in the head.
I could see people running and him shooting, and I could see 3 people fall just right here.
At 5:23, Anders Breivik approached the cafeteria, a building busy with youngsters.
I were in the cafeteria, and then I saw very many people that were running outside, and I called them because there were no reason to run like they were doing. And one of them told me that a guy were shooting them, and I both took it serious because he had a very stressed voice, but also I thought it was a joke.
I thought maybe this was an act. I thought this day has been already so absurd it couldn't get any worse.
I ran outside of the building, and then there were already some people that were lying outside that were killed. And then that was the moment that I understood that this was for real.
As confusion spread amongst the campers, Breivik maintained a menacing calm. His singular purpose, the intention to kill.
There was this girl approaching him from a distance. Looked like a policeman, and this man walked normally with a normal speed towards this girl, and this girl was just walking normally towards him. He pulls up his gun that he held in his hand down by his thighs. He points it up at this girl. She stops and slowly started working backwards. He continues with the same speed towards her, and a series of rounds goes off, and he shoots her down into the ground.
There were around 500 young people gathered around the cafeteria and the campsite.
It was like nothing, not even a single leaf or straw grass moved. Everything just stood completely still. And at the same time that girl hit the ground, it seemed like the ground just lifted itself up and started running away. And that was all the people running.
At 5:31, Breivik began working his way through the campsite towards the woods.
Between the strings and the tents and the things lying around, chairs, it was like an obstacle course. This was an obstacle course where if you fall, you would die, actually.
The gunman had already shot and killed 21. As he made his way through the woods towards the southern tip of the island, he would take 15 more lives.
I just ran, and then I came to the sea, so there were no place to run anymore, and then I just hide in the grass.
You could hear the trees crunching from the bullets that were fired away. You can also see bullet holes.
We heard a lot of shooting, so at the time we heard shooting, it was, of course, terrible because we knew what was happening.
Even though I never prepared for this and never prepared for running for my life or being attacked like this, it's also quite impressive how the body reacts. And the only thing the mind is set on is to survive. Before you even start to think about something, your body and your mind has already done it. Before you realize you have to run, you're already there. Before you start to think swim, you're already in the water.
Rumours of the atrocities unfolding on Utoya began to circulate across Norway. Journalist Marius Arnesen would be dispatched in a helicopter to investigate.
When we approached Utoya, the weather was really, really bad. It's raining from kind of all directions, and you have to go in pretty low, like as low as possible without breaking any laws. And I just told my pilot to start circling the island. I need an overview, I need overview pictures, I need to understand what's going on, because I had no idea.
For many on the island, the only option was to swim for their lives.
Leaving my cell phone behind and my wallet in my pocket so I could be unidentified, we started swimming.
I started seeing people in the water. And the strange thing about your mind is that you don't expect people to be swimming away from an island like scared. This was a summer camp in my head, and my head told me, oh, they're taking a swim. And it takes like a second, and no, they're not swimming, they're not bathing, they're swimming away from the island.
I couldn't breathe. So after 50, maybe 100 meters, I turned back. I realized this was going to be too far, and I also realized that I was probably going to drown.
At that time we started to realize that this is a process that goes over time, because it doesn't really add up. Your head doesn't really want to believe it. You think, okay, it's reported shooting, it might be someone playing with fireworks on one side of the scale, and on the other side of the scale it might be a mass murderer, but that's highly unlikely.
I remember water level was probably around my hip or thighs somewhere. Standing coughing. There was no one around me, so I thought that there was, and suddenly the same man that I saw earlier comes out of the woods just right next to me, 8, maybe 10 meters away, and started screaming that I'm going to kill you and you must all die today.
At 3:26 p.m. on the 22nd of July 2011, the Norwegian capital of Oslo was devastated by a massive car bomb. 8 would die and more than 80 would be injured. Nearly 2 hours later, a new horror had begun 25 miles away when a gunman began running amok on Utoya, a small island packed with young people attending a left-wing Labour Party camp. Journalist Marius Arnesen was in a helicopter above the island, but was as confused as the people on the ground.
At that point, we had no idea if there was 15 people shooting, one person shooting. We didn't know that there was one guy dressed as a cop. But I remember I saw a big, tall character, which I then thought, okay, that might be police.
The gunman, dressed as a police officer, was 32-year-old Anders Breivik, and he had already taken the lives of 36 people on the island. At 5:40 p.m, he began shooting at the youngsters in the water.
He started shooting into the water after the people that were swimming, and when you saw the columns of water that were rising from the bullets, you realized this is happening for real. And after he finished shooting, he turned around towards me and aims at me. You could see into the barrel. I don't know why I screamed, but I did. But I screamed that, "No, don't shoot me." In the blink of an eye, he pulls down his rifle, turns around and walks away.
Later, Breivik would claim that he hadn't shot Adrian at that moment because he looked right-wing in appearance. When he was 27 years old, Breivik had left his shared flat and began detaching himself from the world. He moved into his mother's apartment and began immersing himself in a world of online gaming and extremist internet sites.
He was isolated, living with his mother, staying mostly in his room, playing computer games almost incessantly, visiting extremist websites. He also started to behave rather oddly. He would be sometimes very angry with his mother, and when she was ill, he would use a face mask to avoid contamination somehow. And he would go around in the apartment dressed up in some of these uniforms that he purchased. It was really props for this character he was building for himself.
Friends would notice a change in the anti-Islamist, describing him as increasingly withdrawn and reclusive.
Many spree killers have undergone a period of social withdrawal and social isolation in the few months before they actually engage in their lethal attack. It could be that while Breivik was in his period of isolation, he began focusing more and more on his spree as the only solution, but it could also have been a very canny way for him to go off the grid.
Years later, he would turn his violent video gaming into reality. 6:08 p.m, the 22nd of July, Utoya Island. Anders Breivik had already taken the lives of 49 people. With police occupied by events in Oslo, local residents took to the water in boats in a bid to begin a relief effort, plucking those that had chosen to swim to safety from the freezing lake. One of those residents was local hotel worker Viggo Larsen.
Jeg tror det kan ha vært 15-20 båter, tenker jeg, som søkte rundt øya i alle retninger. Når jeg begynner å nærme meg, så ser jeg en T-skjorte liggende og flyte i vannet. Så jeg sklir sakte mot den som jeg da først trodde var T-skjorte, men det var da et menneske som lå på maven i sjøen og var død.
The local police dispatched officers to the island. Norway's specialist counter-terrorism unit, Delta Force, would also be called into action.
I called the police several times and they said they were on their way, but it took more than 1 hour, so we were completely helpless.
At around 6:10 p.m, a large group of youngsters were at the pump house when a police officer arrived and informed them that the culprit had been caught. As they gathered together, he opened fire. It was Breivik, and 14 would die at that moment.
The really striking aspect about the massacre on Utoya is how calm Breivik was, how methodical he was, and how careful he was.
One of the common mistakes that journalists and media reports make, particularly in the immediate aftermath of a spree, is they believe that the killer was crazed, deranged, and shooting victims at random. We certainly see time and time again in spree killers that they are focused and calm and very much in control of both their emotions and the situation.
For Adrian and those still trapped on the island, the terror would continue.
I was there all alone. I thought maybe lightning wouldn't hit the same place 2 times, but it did. And then suddenly a group of people arrived. You could hear someone whispering, "He's coming."
By 6:30 p.m, Breivik had circled the island and returned to the southern tip, where he began shooting again. The moment was captured from the circling helicopter.
And the first shot was so loud. Before I even could open my eyes, I felt something warm next to my head. It felt like my head exploded. Now I was convinced I was dead.
Adrian had been wounded in the shoulder. 5 of those around him would die.
From what I know, the last bullet that was fired on here was the bullet that hit me in the shoulder and still is there. He was captured 1 minute and 20 seconds after the last shot.
After an hour and 9 minutes of unchecked bloodshed, Delta Force would arrive on the shores of Utoya to face down Anders Breivik.
The last thing that we were actually able to see was the police walking like in tactical formations, like terrorists, like terror cops do, and checking out stuff.
Then, the man responsible for a massacre would surrender without a fight.
Breivik's spree was certainly different from many other sprees that have gone before it. Predominantly, spree killers either kill themselves or they are killed by law enforcement. Clearly, Breivik wanted to be taken alive so he could give his ideological views a platform.
Although the violence may have been over, for those survivors left on Utoya, the trauma would continue.
I was rescued by the police and they took me away and I was taken by a private boat. But when we came to the hotel where everybody was gathered, all those who survived, I immediately understood that the numbers of the killed will be extremely high.
I'd like to say anything happened so fast, but actually it didn't. It happened very slowly. Seemed like we were trapped here forever. And some part of me probably still is.
In one afternoon, Anders Breivik had claimed the lives of 77 of his countrymen, 8 in Oslo, and 69 on Utoya Island. He claimed to have committed the massacre as a political act. Several months prior to the attacks, the reclusive right-winger had moved from his mother's Oslo flat to an isolated farm 2 hours north. All the while, he kept a diary of his preparations. These would form a significant part of a large manifesto, one that he intended to publish.
He played a very savvy game of taking lots of media-friendly pictures of himself, posturing with guns, posturing in uniforms, looking very Aryan on some occasions, showing his blue eyes and his blonde hair. He saw himself as being suitable for breeding, almost like a stud for future generations of the Aryan race. So he's clearly a very narcissistic individual who knows how to sell the image of what he was trying to pass on.
Under the guise of becoming a vegetable farmer, Breivik would use his seclusion to his advantage, gathering ammunition and planning his attack.
This is when he researched and planned and got there with all of his equipment and started manufacturing his bomb.
On the 21st of July 2011, the day before his killing spree, Breivik completed a final recce in Oslo city centre before returning to the farm one last time. He was picked up at Reyna station by taxi driver Arild Tangen.
I meet Breivik in the train station, and he stand there, want a taxi, so I ask him if I maybe drive him home. The farm is about 12 kilometers from Reyna Centrum. Big farms with a lot of space. He had the place and to do what he was going to do.
Breivik has claimed that he spent 11 months preparing for his spree and bomb attacks. He clearly knew what he was doing, and he knew the best way to go about it. He could effectively disappear while he ordered the parts and stockpiled the weapons and bomb-making equipment that he would need.
After I drive him home, he went out of the car and he just stand in the middle of the courtyard. Yes. When I let him out, he was just standing there with his briefcase. I think, why don't you go in or do something? But he just stayed there. So I took my time just to see, but I've never been down to the farm before. He had no intention to go inside the house because he was in a hurry.
Breivik would wait for the taxi to leave before driving back to Oslo. At 2:09 p.m, Breivik would make his motivations public, sending out his 1,500-plus page manifesto to supposed sympathizers across Europe. Just over an hour later, his killing spree, the deadliest in world history, would begin. But what had driven Anders Breivik to commit such an unimaginable crime? On the 22nd of July 2011, Norway had changed forever. Anders Breivik's attacks in Oslo and on Utoya had left a nation in mourning.
It is sometimes easy just to talk about the number, about the attack, but I mean these were 77 individuals that are no longer with us. Most of them were very young, the youngest was 14. The majority were below 18, so yeah, that is what 22nd of July is about, is those who lost their lives.
I didn't feel anger, I just felt sorrow. I felt sorry for the whole situation. This guy I didn't feel sorry for, but all the people that he hurt and all the families that he destroyed, I just wish him dead.
In court, Breivik would attempt to use his trial as a platform to promote his twisted ideology.
It seemed like the court was kind of a theater for him. What the whole trial was about for him was to get recognition as a political terrorist, as an extremist, as a militant, and not to be somehow written off as crazy.
That picture of Breivik giving the fisted salute probably did as much for his PR as his 1,500-page manifesto did. And again, that is one of the legacies of Breivik's murders, is that he's been allowed to live and allowed to publicise his deranged beliefs.
Anders Behring Breivik would be found guilty of the murders of 77, 8 losing their lives in Oslo, and 69 on the island of Utoya. He would receive a 21-year sentence, the maximum possible under Norwegian law. A question that still puzzled, however, was what could have caused this man to commit such chilling crimes.
To try to understand people like this, I don't think it's possible. It's like trying to understand Ted Bundy or Adolf Hitler. It's impossible.
That's, I guess, the question that most of us has been asking us. How can one person do this? How can you be able to do it as a human being?
The core, the essence of the hatred of Breivik stems from child abuse and was somehow refined over the years.
Breivik wasn't mentally ill, but there is evidence to suggest he was either a paranoid personality type or indeed he was more likely to be someone with a narcissistic personality disorder.
If you think about, could he have been stopped earlier, is that the one time he was really within the system when somehow the Norwegian state authority recognized there was something wrong. It was at the time when he was really young, when he was 3 or 4 years old, but the system let him go.
For Adrian Prekon, the court case had answered a disturbing question.
It doesn't make any sense for me, and I don't know why I'm alive. How can I be this lucky?
Many spree killings, we see some victims are shot, others are allowed to live. At Columbine, in Hungerford, and again in Utoya with Breivik, we see some victims are toyed with and they're allowed to survive on the whim of the offender.
He explained in court after a week that he remembered why he spared me. And he said I looked like one of his, like a right-wing extremist. I didn't look like a Marxist, and he thought that I should stay alive.
Despite Breivik having taken aim at his own people and striking at their very heart, their refusal to be cowed by their attacker stands strong.
1 minute we are falling because someone is shooting after us, and a couple of days later we're all standing in the streets with our roses and torches and rising again. And I believe that's the best experience a country can have with themselves, to fall and rise together.
Although the innocence of Utoya may have been lost on the 22nd of July, its beauty will remain.
It affected Norway in a way that Norway is not so small and safe anymore.
My daily life is like before, but of course it changed Norway, and it changed me as a person.
Det vanskelig å slippe taket, men til stadighet så tenker han på det som skjedde på Utoya, frem nå til og med 2 år etter.
For Adrian Prekon, the experience of that day may have been harrowing, but his bond with the people that travelled there that fateful summer has survived.
I still say it, and the closest people around me also say it, that I never returned home from Utoya. And that's because a part of me is still struggling out there.